as we know, if you look at the big, and no matter how you cut it up in thematic investing, the big mega trends of demographic shift, climate change, geopolitical tensions, technological transformation and disruption, urbanization, one immediately thinks of Asia, not just from the point of view of where all of these are having such a huge effect, but also where many of the companies that are of the greatest interest to investors may be based, particularly when you look at automated driving and clean energy and other major areas of technological disruption. One thinks actually that the manufacturing of those products, that's going to end up in Asia where the skills are. And that's an area I'm looking forward to developing a bit with our panel today. We're very fortunate to be joined by Phil Lee, the head of research and portfolio manager at Mirai Asset Global Investments. We've got Joyce Earp, the head of Asia Pacific at NASDAQ Indexes. They're both in Hong Kong, and with some strong coffee in hand, Timo Pfeiffer at Selective. He's in Frankfurt, and we're very fortunate to be joined by everyone on this panel. So without further ado, let's crack on. I'm very, very pleased to have this panel, particularly for this question, which is to do with the landscape that we're seeing in Asia, in thematic investing in Asia. We'll come on later to how that fits into the world. But just to ask my three panelists, starting with Phil, how the whole topic of thematic investing looks from where you are sitting.
Hi, thanks, Louis, and thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Phil Lee, head of research in the Mirai Asset Global Investment and the portfolio manager for Asia. To me, the thematic approach investment is quite effective and attractive way when it comes to Asia investment. There are twofold. The first one is that Asia is really commitment and successful to build up globally competitive industrial cluster where there are many good company in the same region. Then if you have bunch of the good company, then it's easy to have exposure to the thematic approach to have a better return. Also, there are many growing industry in Asia, and then also we can find a very good, well-established industrial cluster across the region. Second point is that, we know that a lot of macro issues, geopolitical tension between Asia, especially China and the Western world. And then if you have kind of a narrow down your exposure to certain thematic investment, then you can manage the macro risk or geopolitical risk. So it gives a more opportunity, more option to investor how to model through this the top level risk.
And so when you think about those, are you thinking of it in terms of the allocation there, or when you talk about those risks, you talking about that in terms of the absolute risk, or just the how you allocate to compensate for that?
To me, there are a lot of quite interesting and attractive thematic the investment idea in Asia, especially surrounding the China space, like especially new industry like electric vehicle battery or clean energy like solar and the wind, also hardware innovations. Then from the portfolio perspective, we have multiple choice to diversify our exposure to different themes. Of course, we can have exposure individual stock, but there are, as I said, there are a bunch of good companies. Then maybe we can have exposure to theme with diversification. So the good thing is that each theme has different business cycle. Let's say solar industry, electric vehicle industry, or maybe cloud computing. Each one has different business cycle or momentum or government policy direction. So then we have better option to mitigate the risk, to offset the risk by investing in it, making exposure to different themes.
I'd like to bring Joyce in at this point, if possible. Joyce, you're in a fantastic position to offer us the perspective of what all this looks like if we've set it against in a sort of global context against certainly the US. What does it all look like from where you're sitting, which does provide this fascinating kind of perspective that we don't necessarily get all the time, just focusing on Asia?
Thank you, Leo. It's great to be here. I'm Joyce from NASA Indices. It's an incredible year for the probability and the flows we've seen in this area in the region. If we look at the landscape, NASDAQ has licensed our indices for more than 60 ETPs in the region. 19 of them are classified as thematic, including biotech, including semiconductors, AI, robotics, cybersecurity, infrastructure. This product has a total inflow of more than $550 million last quarter and $1.7 billion in the last 12 months. Total AUM of them is just under $4 billion. In addition of those thematic products, most of our product licenses in the region are tracking the NASDAQ 100 index. It is not a thematic index, but we would say that it is a diversified thematic benchmark. NASDAQ 100 companies actually appear in various thematic indices we are calculating. For example, 24 NASDAQ 100 companies are constituents in our AI and big data index. 7 companies are the constituents of the semiconductor index. And among the 100 companies, 58 of them recently filed patents across one or more key areas of disruptive technology, such as artificial intelligence, clean energy, or blockchain. If we look at the numbers, these products have a total inflow of $1.2 billion in the last quarter and $2.4 billion in the last 12 months. The total AUM of these products are close to $6 billion. The uptick and interest on NASDAQ 100 index is phenomenal. And this on the demand side, what we can see from the thematic investment trend in this region.
Joyce, in terms of the conversation around this, would you say that the last 18 months have significantly changed the perception of Asia within the conversations that you're seeing in the US on this? Do the last 18 months feel especially significant in terms of change?
I would say the change expenses in APAC rather than in the US. For example, NASDAQ has been calculating different thematic indices for more than a decade. And of course, US has been the largest ETF market, and most of the largest innovative companies are listed there. And since that time, we have been developing thematic indices, including semiconductors, biotech, clean energy, cloud computing. But most of the indices are focusing on the US company. And now we're seeing Asian investors start looking into this thematic across different themes. As Bill mentioned, there are lots of advantage for investors looking into the themes. I'll share some numbers with all of you later and how exciting we see from the trend we see here in the market.
Yeah, that's great. We'll come back to that in a moment. But I want to bring Timo in at this point as well, just to give his sense of the landscape.
Yes, sure. Thanks, Leo. And let me send some greetings and a hi, first of all, to everybody over in Asia and Hong Kong. That's clients, that's partners. And that's the team that I haven't been able to visit in almost 2 years now. So, let's do this virtually. When you ask on the landscape thematics in Asia, the one word that immediately comes to my mind is it's booming. So there's pretty strong dynamics. There's a lot of trends. There's a lot of innovation happening. And I would just summarize it from that perspective where I'm sitting. And let's make it a bit of more of a global perspective as it's booming. And really in different perspectives, let me try to put it in three layers. The one is clearly demand flows, investor demand and assets going that way. While the second part, you've just asked and looked at the last 18 months, and let's look at 18, 24 months. That's probably one of the changes and dynamics we get to. And Phil is the super expert on the ground. That's really the underlyings and companies active in those themes, active in those areas. And then number three is really the, let's say, topics and trends. If I think of societal changes, if I think of some of the dynamics and changes there, but definitely and also from the technological perspective and innovation happening in that space, increasingly and also being driven by companies and entrepreneurs out of Asia. So booming is the word. It is a pretty dynamic landscape, some pretty dynamic changes and far and foremost momentum really across those three different areas. That's the special part, I would say, in Asia as part of this wider trend globally in thematic investing.
Not just from Joyce a few minutes ago, but also in earlier sessions of today's FT Live event, we've heard different accounts of the growth rate of thematic investing in the US, and you mentioned, you talk about the Asia side of things booming. Is it that what we're seeing in Asia? Do you think that is a delayed version of what we saw in the US? Or do you think it is qualitatively different in terms of what investors will look at and what is, what is at the center of their conversation?
It's probably a more dynamic version of what's happening in the US. I wouldn't call it a delayed. What I would, however, say is thinking of, from my perspective, West, the US, sitting here in Europe, and then looking over East into Asia, I think it is very fair to say that the overarching headlines and the overarching themes are pretty consistent globally. I think Phil mentioned the dominant electric vehicles, future of mobility headline. I mean, there's plenty of products that have started in the US, a lot of applications here on the ground in Europe, both as ETFs as well as in structured product space. And of course, pretty dominant topic also over in Asia. So the themes themselves, by and large, are pretty consistent and pretty much the same. If I think of demographic changes, the way we live and behave and changes around that, definitely if I think of some of the tech-driven themes. And then there's probably different stages of application, and we'll probably get to that if I think of sustainability and ESG. So I would definitely not call this just the delayed version. However, consistency of themes, and some of those themes pop up earlier rather than later in one part of the world, and then get adopted globally. So that's pretty consistent. I think it's also fair to say that the application and implementation differs locally, where, of course, one of the prime examples is going to be, let's say, the exposure to Asian companies, and in particular China, more dominant on the ground in Asia than it is elsewhere in the world, and primarily thinking of the US.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Phil,
Leo, maybe I want to share some idea on it. So the Asia is lagging the Western world in terms of a thematic investment. Is maybe because it reflects economic development. Before, Asia is more like an emerging country, so they are more like a catch up to the Western world. But nowadays, Asia became more sophisticated and matured. Asia has many industry which is globally competitive. So it's more like is now is kind of advanced in some sense, then we can find a very good bunch of company which we classified as a thematic the approach. So that's the reason we are seeing the emergence of this thematic investment in Asia.
Yeah, Phil, can we stay with you just for a minute and just to drill into that a little bit on China, which I know I'm looking forward to hearing you talk about that in particular. But how would you, in concrete terms, really, if you explain how you look at China in this context?
China has many strengths in this perspective because China is a vast market and has many good talent pool built last 30 years through the higher education and also the government strong industrial policies as well as entrepreneurship who want to be a globally leader. So in these three aspects, it create a globally competitive cluster or city or hub. Then we can find many good themes from the China space. Is Chinese uniqueness similar to the US maybe? Which is not easily found in other country and the region. China is vast and enough to embrace many new themes. So from my perspective, sometimes I'm exciting to find the new themes from the China. And then also now so many investors in Asia, in the Western, to find out this opportunity. So still, when it comes to new emerging technology industry, we can find the themes in China as well. That's kind of the strengthen or attractiveness of China investment.
Joyce, I hope that's okay. Joyce, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. We had a small technical thing.
Yes,
sorry.
I'm back.
Joyce, sorry. I wonder what your thoughts on that were and how that translates to what you're seeing.
Yeah, I want to quote one of the examples that we see from the market from Asia. We have been, as mentioned before, we have been calculating a lot of indices focusing on US only. One of the examples is the cloud computing index. It was started back in 2011, and an ETF was listed at that time. The AUM was great. It was about 2.3 billion US dollar at the end of 2019. In 2020, right on the thematic investment trend, total inflow was 3.8 billion just 1 year. And the latest AUM is about 6.1 billion. The index is great as it holistically representing the industry, but it couldn't please issuers or investors in this region because the index is not covering any companies outside US, especially Asian companies. So in the past, US companies dominating the thematic luxury growth. With the pandemic and the work from home environment, a lot of Asian companies in particular things have been growing during the pandemic, and the growth was significant and becoming the important driver of index performance. We understand the importance to look at the theme. It looks beyond US. We're developing international version of thematic indices to fill the gap. For example, June this year, we launched the international version of cloud computing index. The index is covering international ex-US company. So as you can imagine, Asian companies have a total of 76% in the ratings of the index, and Chinese company accounted for 27% in the index. Similar examples are the launch of the global semiconductors index, and we've also got some what Phil mentioned before, emerging markets, and China becomes the very important part in that area. We launched the Nasdaq CTA Emerging Markets Internet and E-commerce Index in November last year. It's capturing one of the themes which Asian companies are particularly strong in the area. So companies from China and Korea accounted for over 77% in the index, and Global has listed an ETF on the index. So this is what we see from the market, and the importance of like including Asian companies in our thematic US indices.
I mean, it crosses over with a couple of things that we've been talking about as well. Phil, you know, it's that question of ideas versus manufacturing that, you know, you end up focusing on that. But Timo as well, it's a question, isn't it, of how you perceive these themes, these big themes, adapting to quite rapid change and adapting as they cross over with other themes, right?
Yes, now I need to watch out how to structure this. There's many impulses coming from Choice and Phil, and your question around China and how this is impacting thematics. Let's not forget it's a massive transition that is happening over there. It's a massive shift from China as a whole, as a giant in terms of population, in terms of economics, politics, and all around that. So we've probably started looking over there from a pure investment perspective, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago as part of BRICS, yeah, the probably biggest letter in those four. We've come a long way. China thinks and acts in 5 years plans. I'm tempted to say, Phil was just talking about new trends emerging, short-term trends. Yeah, we tend to look too much at that next quarter and the performance and what's next in terms of trends, while I think it's much more of a longer term perspective. So 5 years plan, and the investment horizon is probably 5, 10, 20 years down the line, where all of these themes in thematic investing are mega trends. That's, how I like to think of them, and should not be, the next investment hype driving the next quarter. And yes, there's part of this, and yes, that's going to happen. But if I think of time horizon and time perspective, it's much more on the mid and longer term, for sure. Some of the questions, Leo, as you just asked it, is, yes, there's going to be bumps along the road. Yes, there's going to be some, call it disruptions or hurdles, at least from a short-term perspective, perceived as hurdles. If I think of some of the regulations coming in, there's going to be some hurdles if I think of performance and looking at, technology just this year. It's not all just going to be a straight line. But those are bumps on a longer term perspective, bumps on a longer term road and journey. And the overall trends coming out of Asia, and particularly if we thought of China, are there and are going to continue. Besides those short term bumps, Leo, you've just mentioned semiconductors and the shortages and some of the issues happening around that. Yes, that's there, but there's no doubt that this is going to be one of those already since years and continuing mega trends and drivers. If I think of disruptive technologies and things happening there, and China entering main stage, let's put it this way.
Phil, what do you think about that? Timo mentions that the time horizon there, which is really important. Not just in Asia, but just keeping it focused on Asia. When you do have a situation as we have over the last few weeks, where you see regulatory risk suddenly in China, suddenly having a big impact on the kind of short term, perhaps even medium term, of some of these themes that you look at. How does the thematic investing world adapt to that, and how should it adapt to that, do you think?
That's a very good question. That issue is dominate the market for a while. The answer is that thematic investment is offering very good tool to model through this regulatory risk. Of course, we can group this internet company as one theme, but also there are many different themes like electric vehicle battery, clean energy, or cloud computing, or the hardware innovation, semiconductor, biotech, and then we can move from this internet theme to the another theme. So actually, investor perspective very easy to move around. based on their understanding on how the China is evolving. And then, to be honest, the internet is not big economy in China. If you look in China, internet is only small part of the total entire economy. China, big part still comes from the manufacturing or consumption and other part of the economic activity. This thematic approach captured other part of economic activity. And of course, the economy is already evolving. And the thematic is offering very good tool to adaptive to these economic changes. Currently, we are clearly saying that government is very much suppressive on internet business model because it's very much became the kind of a monopolistic position, while government continue to support new industry which has global influence like electric vehicle, clean energy, and the autonomous driving or the automation. So we might, I mean, personally also, we are finding more opportunity from this area, and still there are many the ETF, thematic or ETF offered in the market to have exposure to this new economy of China.
Leo, if I may, to add on the subject of regulation, yeah, and I think there's no suspicion that I'm, would be in favor of any sort of big regulations happening in the market or elsewhere. But it's the way to go, yeah. And I can neither, criticize or show sympathies for the Chinese government in doing so. But as part of such major shifts and transitions, yeah, it has to be part of the game to set some, let's say, boundaries or steer that tanker in the direction you want to have it in the medium or longer term. So again, on this time horizon, yes, it's short-term bumps on the road, and yes, it adds short-term volatility, but it helps to achieve the, let's say, mid-term, longer-term goals and directions from a technology, from industry segments, as Phil alluded to, and probably also from societal aspects.
Joyce, can I bring you in as well for that question?
Yeah, sure. Totally agree with what Bill Timo mentioned. The theme is going to be a long-term rise. And if we look at, for example, Nasdaq 100, it's not thematic, but the growth in the past 5 years was over 220%. If you think the growth is impressive, there are actually plenty of thematic indices outperform Nasdaq 100, double or triple the index. Some of the examples, including semiconductors, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, etc. So, I think compared to the board-based Asian Pacific X-Japan Index, the 5-year performance was only about 47%, and the growth of the board-based global index in the past 5 years was about 75%. So you can see there are lots of rooms for investors to look into thematic as one of their investment tools to capture the growth next 10 years.
So I normally we would leave the audience questions to a little bit later, but there's one that's come up that that is actually very relevant to this. Phil, perhaps you could answer this. What are the implications of the Chinese clampdown, and do you see it as a structural issue that could impact the flow and liquidity in both H&A China shares?
Right, that's a good question. Personally, the mainland equity has more the promising future. Hong Kong stock has somewhat multiple issue. The first one is that the market is dominated by the foreign institution investors rather than domestic money. So they are less confident about China development. Of course, China has many problems and issues, but China also in some sense in a right direction for the economic development. But the foreigners usually don't believe it. So Hong Kong market is continued to be hampered by this negative view, while the mainland has much kind of a better understanding on what government direction and how the economy will evolve. And then actually many key element in the thematic investment like Global X, China thematic ETF, majority of their holdings has exposure to A-share stocks. A-share tended to have a somewhat bad reputation in the past, but in my view, in my observation last 10 years, has a lot of improvement in terms of quality, in terms of corporate governance, and in terms of global competitiveness. So through the Global X thematic ETF, you can have exposure to better part of China equity market. Is somewhat to me a little bit sort of the structural change. A-share market should be an anchor core for China investment rather than Hong Kong share, rather than especially ADR. The Chinese company listed in the US is quite in a vulnerable situation. So maybe it's better to have exposure to mainland and a little, to some extent, Hong Kong. That is somewhat a structural change we have seen and which will continue for a while.
But so, and to Timo and to Joyce, is there a perception that the more that is there a perception that the more kind of Asia you introduce to a given theme, the greater is its risk profile? Is that a perception that you think exists or could come to exist?
It's simply a question. Sorry, Joyce, if I quickly may. A simply question again of perspective of where I'm sitting. From my European lens and view and in investor allocation, yes, it is. But that's because I'm further away. And if I look at it from the US, yes, it is again. But ultimately, if I think of it as diversification and a thematic product and thematic exposure as a diversification tool, and my motivation to add diversification to my overall portfolio, then it's not the risky part. Then I add diversification, and then I help Chinese stocks and Chinese exposure or Asian exposure at large helps me to achieve that goal. So yes, if I look at the individual stock and the individual component, yes, I add volatility. And from my non-Asian view, it is more risky, no doubt. If I put it in a broader context, just looking at my own little portfolio or an investor's perspective, wanting to diversify, there's no way around it.
Joyce.
From my point of view, we see the demand is there, the trend is there. I mean, investors here in Asia, they love investing into thematic indices. I mean, they love to see names they are familiar with. So Asian companies, especially Chinese companies, will be part of the growth. I mean, the thematic investment growth. And I think I will echo what Phil and Timo say, is the volatility is short term. Like we're looking to a longer horizon, 5 to 10 years. So gradually, this kind of risk will be like gradually removed. I mean, gradually we digest this kind of risk, and then we will see the growth, because like China is the second largest economy, and then we can't ignore the market anyway.
So Joyce, can I just pick up on something? When you say names that they're familiar with, why is that more appealing? I mean, is in thematic investing, I would imagine that you like the idea that you can latch onto something that fits into a theme that you don't necessarily you didn't previously know as much about, but it's part of a theme that you do. So tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, investors generally have preference over the familiar names they heard, I mean, every day. Like, we in Asia, we are close to our like countries like next to us, like Japan, Korea, yeah, of course China. We know a lot of those names from our newspapers, like yeah. So we definitely seeing the interest from the investors, seeing more Asian companies in thematic indices. Yeah, when we selling our US thematic index, yeah, one of the challenges actually they like the theme a lot, but actually they don't know a lot about the names that
Right.
they are investing into. Yeah, so Asian names, yeah, Asian companies definitely will be the trend for Asian investors. Yeah, this is what I think.
Excellent.
I think that I have some addition. So, for example, when it comes to electric vehicle, everyone know Tesla. So the people can invest in Tesla. Maybe they know the CATL, the largest battery maker in China. But they don't know what is the second tier battery maker or cathode maker, anode maker, separator, or the battery equipment maker from China who are number one in the world. Then maybe thematic approach is better, right? The industry itself is growing and has a triple, maybe is kind of a tenfold in the next 10 years. And then any company, any leading company in this supply chain will benefit. But we know only Tesla. But if you have exposure to thematic investment, maybe China EV ETF, then you have full exposure to the growing, the new industry. So that's, I think, in line with what Joe is saying. People has some exposure to familiar name, but eventually they might miss some good opportunity within this group. So thematic investment as a good option in this case.
Can I just switch things ever so slightly and just ask the panel about ESG? I mean, everyone has their own views on ESG. I'm interested, given who our panel are, where does ESG fit into? Is ESG a useful? Is it a useful thing in this context? And is it reliable as in terms of understanding the growth projections for thematic for thematic funds and so on? Is it and thematic products? Is ESG a useful way to frame this? Timo.
100% yes. It's the one part, if you look at thematic investment at a global scale or stage, where Asia is lacking, where the application of across ESG, sustainable investment strategies, is behind other areas in the world, in particular Europe over here. I think it's fair to say that Europe, by and large, is much more advanced and active in the whole investment space of ESG. So I'm not exaggerating if I say like literally 80% of conversations here on the ground in Europe, that's for ETF issuers, that's for institutional investors, are centered around and involve ESG elements. That is taking center stage also in the US and slowly kicking in. And there's still a longer way to go for Asia and China, again, going back to trends, to the themes, and to investor demand. And now you may say, hey, that's not true because of clean technologies and clean energy. Yes, there are some first adoptions thereof. But if I particularly look at the E part in ESG, which over here is the biggest driver, so anything around environmental and in particular climate transition, climate-based investment strategies, that I think is still one of the gaps over in Asia, and particularly also zooming into China. And if I try to take a view, I don't know, again, 5 years ahead, there's no doubt in my mind that ESG, as part of thematic investing, probably as the main driver of themes across thematic investing, will have also taken center stage across Asia.
Yeah, Joyce, what do you think about that? I mean, particularly on the G bit of ESG is you certainly get a big variation in perceptions in Asia of how investable that G part of that is. What about the conversations that you have?
I think from our perspective, we are receiving like inquiries or questions about how we implement ESG in our indices. So what we are trying to do, we have a lot of like popular thematic indices, and the idea is like adding the ESG screening on top of those thematic ideas. For example, EV, can we add the layer of ESG to make the index like more ESG focused? And also, we also just launched the Nasdaq 100 ESG index earlier this year. So we are prepared. I mean, we are able to do the screening on our indices, and we are expecting more indices roll out for like investors in this region. I mean, of course, I totally agree with Timo. Asia is lag behind other markets. So we'll start, I mean, from US, see how it goes. And then if the idea is appealing, then I'm sure investors in Asia would welcome such a change, such an overlay on the thematic indices.
We've had a question from the audience, which is something that we should definitely cover, given we've got a few more minutes left, which is that India has been one of the best performing markets in both Asia and the world in the last 18 months. How would the panelists comment on that? And I suppose a lot of these big themes that we haven't dwelt on too much in this session so far. Urbanization, for example, Indian urbanization is a huge part of that. Timo, what would you say about the outperformance of the Indian market?
I can echo and repeat just some of the stuff that we've said very early on in the session on China. Yeah, and I think I had mentioned BRIC, BRIC, where India, of course, is the second big one. There's differences, particularly if you look at China, and you've just mentioned some of the societal changes and age structure, for example, of the population, etc. There's different challenges around urbanization, some things in common there, but differences. And Phil earlier having referred to from China, more coming from the manufacturing bench, if you like. India has been more advanced into technology and in particular software and more active there. So you do find these local champions and leaders in certain segments there as well, and of course investment opportunities. And also I can repeat some of the stuff we've said on time horizon. You can repeat your question on volatility. It's all true as well. It's a different cycle. It's different dynamics that this year have played out in favor of India. And but again, that's short term. Thinking of the longer term trends, yes, India absolute element and driver factor there as well. Less applications, if I think of thematic exposures, India focused. That's something I don't see, at least not immediately. So pure India exposure, if you like.
Thank you. Yeah, no, Phil, I feel like you've got something to say on this.
Yeah. India is very has a great potential, but it has different characteristics to other Asian countries like China, Korea, or Japan. India is very kind of early stage emerging country where everything is growing, and then there is not a meaningful industry who are globally competitive. It's still immature. So it looks great potential, but when it comes to thematic approach, we need industry which are globally competitive. China has it, Korea has it, Japan has it, but India still not yet reached there. So that's the reason there are little offering of Indian thematic approach at the moment. But over time, maybe 3 years, a few years later, we will see more as India also business is evolving. But at the moment, not many, because of India's still very early stage of emerging development.
I mean, we've got a few minutes left, and one thing I'd really like to ask all the panelists is look, given how different the conversations that you're having now are from the ones you were having 18 months ago, just because of what's been happening. What are your predictions for the kind of conversations you think that you're going to be having going into next year? The pandemic will be 2 years old as an issue. Many of these behavioral changes that we've seen will be quite familiar, really, and bedded in some ways. As a quick answer from each of you, what do you think we're going to be talking about in thematic investing? What's going to be the big thing that we're going to be talking about going into next year? Starting with Phil.
Wow, that's most difficult question. I want you to answer later, but let's say 18 months next year. One thing clear is that there are a few outstanding themes still exist next year and a year later. So every moment we have very important theme to be performed well in the market. This year it is electric vehicle, clean energy. The next year maybe it could be computing, cloud computing for China, cloud computing or biotech. So it's kind of a rotation among the themes will continue in the next couple of years. The next year. Maybe still the theme we are positive on is still work, because many of them are the mega trends, like still electric vehicle is big things. Now we are seeing the massive adoption of the EV across the world. It's just start. So to me is decades theme, and where we are when we just started. So that could be another dominate the theme. Also, the carbon emission is one other big theme. I was surprised China is so committed to reduce carbon emission. It was not China before, but it totally looks different. Partially driven by the global collaboration to tackle the climate change. So every country is moving in the same direction. It also nearly starting the closest starting point. So we will see another mega trend in coming years in this clean energy, this smart grid, this energy transition. So that will be another main theme we have to focus on next year.
Thank you, Phil. I'm afraid you've left your two panelists only 10 seconds each for a one-word answer. So Joyce, very quickly.
Definitely, we are rolling out more indices covering Asian companies, and with the technology, we have a lot of more innovative tools to identify which companies belong to that theme. So a lot of creativity, a lot of innovations coming up this year.
Lovely. And Timo, you've got 10 seconds.
In 18 months, I hope to be on the ground again and see Phil in the skyline live and in color, not virtually in front of a laptop. And no doubt that ESG is going to be much more prominent, 100% sure.